UK in shock. Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis say something no one expected. Emotional stories. The morning started like any other at Windsor Castle. The sun was just beginning to rise over the ancient stone walls, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured gardens. Inside the royal residence, the household staff moved quietly through the corridors, preparing for another day in the life of the Wales family. But nobody knew that this particular Tuesday would become a day that changed everything. Princess Charlotte, now 9 years old, had always been known for her composed demeanor. Even as a young child, she carried herself with a grace that seemed beyond her years. Her teachers at Lambrook School often remarked on her maturity and kindness. She was the girl who would comfort a crying classmate, who would share her lunch without being asked, who would stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. But beneath that poised exterior, something had been weighing heavily on her young heart. Prince Louis, her younger brother, was different in many ways. At 6 years old, he was known for his cheeky personality and infectious laugh. The public had seen glimpses of his spirited nature during official events, like when he made faces during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. He was the child who brought lightness and joy wherever he went, never afraid to be himself even in the most formal settings. His parents, William and Catherine, often said he kept them grounded and reminded them not to take life too seriously. That morning, as the family gathered for breakfast in their private dining room, something felt different. The usual chatter was missing. Prince George, their eldest brother, noticed it first. Charlotte was pushing her scrambled eggs around her plate, barely eating. Louis, normally the first to finish his breakfast and ask for seconds, sat unusually still, his small hands folded in his lap. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, exchanged a concerned glance with her husband. As a mother, she could sense when something was troubling her children. She had always made it a priority to create an environment where her children felt safe to express their feelings, away from the pressures and expectations that came with their royal status. She reached across the table and gently touched Charlotte's hand. The question was simple and filled with motherly warmth. Charlotte looked up, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Louis immediately reached for his sister's other hand, a gesture of solidarity that surprised everyone at the table. The two younger children looked at each other, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. They had talked about this moment, planned for it even, lying awake in their bedrooms the night before. William set down his coffee cup, giving his full attention to his children. He had learned from his own childhood experiences that sometimes the most important conversations happened in the quietest moments. He nodded encouragingly, letting them know that whatever they wanted to say, he was ready to listen. Charlotte took a deep breath, the kind that children take when they're trying to be brave. She began to speak, her voice soft but clear. What she said next would send ripples not just through the royal household, but through the entire nation. She spoke about something that had been building inside her for months, something she had witnessed and could no longer stay silent about. Louis, finding courage in his sister's words, added his own thoughts. His childish voice carried a wisdom that seemed impossible for someone so young. Together, the two children began to reveal something that nobody in the room had expected to hear. Their words were honest, innocent, and completely unfiltered by royal protocol or public relations considerations. The staff members who were present in the room stood frozen, uncertain whether to stay or leave. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming pride mixed with concern. William felt his throat tighten as he listened to his children speak their truth. George sat in stunned silence, suddenly understanding that his younger siblings had been carrying a burden he hadn't even noticed. What Charlotte and Louis revealed that morning wasn't about palace secrets or family scandals. It wasn't about complaints or privileges. Instead, they spoke about something far more profound and unexpected. They talked about the world they were inheriting, about the people they had met during royal engagements, about the things they had seen that troubled their young hearts. They spoke about responsibility and purpose in a way that no one had ever heard royal children speak before. Charlotte mentioned a visit to a children's hospital that had happened 3 months earlier. She remembered every detail, every child's face, every parent's worried expression. She talked about a little girl named Emma who had been so excited to meet a real princess, but who had looked so tired and pale. Charlotte had learned later that Emma was fighting a serious illness, and the image of that brave little girl had stayed with her ever since. Louis brought up a different memory from a visit to a food bank with his mother. He had seen children his own age, waiting in line with their parents, and he couldn't understand why some children had so much while others had so little. His innocent questions had no easy answers, and that confusion had turned into a determination to do something, to make a difference somehow. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. Breakfast grew cold on the plates as the family sat together, listening, sharing, and beginning to understand that Charlotte and Louis were not just royal children being raised for ceremonial duties. They were individuals with their own voices, their own observations, and their own desire to use their positions for something meaningful. By the time the children finished speaking, the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. What had started as an ordinary family breakfast had become a turning point. William and Catherine realized that their approach to raising their children had created something beautiful and unexpected. They had raised children who cared deeply about others, who questioned the world around them, and who weren't afraid to speak up about what they believed was right. The decision about what to do next wasn't made immediately. There were considerations to think about, protocols to navigate, and the children's privacy to protect. But one thing was absolutely clear to everyone in that room. Charlotte and Louis had said something that no one expected, and their words carried a weight and sincerity that couldn't be ignored. The question now was how the family, and eventually the nation, would respond to what these two young royals had so bravely expressed. The news of what happened at breakfast didn't leak to the press immediately, but it did spread through the palace staff like wildfire. By lunchtime, every member of the household who worked closely with the Wales family had heard whispers that something significant had occurred. The usual cheerful atmosphere felt different, charged with an anticipation that nobody could quite explain. Catherine spent the afternoon in her private office, making phone calls to trusted advisors and family members. She spoke with her own mother, Carol Middleton, who had always been a source of grounded wisdom. The conversation lasted over an hour, and when Catherine emerged from her office, there was a new determination in her eyes. She had always protected her children fiercely, but now she faced a different kind of challenge. How could she support them in speaking their truth, while also shielding them from potential backlash or exploitation? William, meanwhile, took a walk around the grounds with his father, King Charles. The relationship between father and son had deepened over the years, especially since Charles had taken the throne. They discussed the morning's events in detail, and Charles surprised William with his response. Instead of concern about protocol or tradition, the king expressed genuine admiration for his grandchildren's compassion and awareness. He shared stories of his own childhood, of times when he had wanted to speak up about causes he cared about but had been discouraged because he was too young or because it wasn't considered appropriate. Charlotte and Louis spent the afternoon in their favorite spot, a small reading nook in the castle library. They weren't reading, though. Instead, they sat together on the window seat, looking out at the gardens and talking quietly. George joined them after his tutoring session, sitting cross-legged on the floor and listening as his younger siblings explained everything they had been feeling and thinking. George was 11 now, old enough to understand the complexity of their situation. He felt guilty for not noticing what his brother and sister had been going through. He had been so focused on his own studies and responsibilities as the future heir that he had missed the signs that Charlotte and Louis were struggling with something important. But instead of making it about himself, he asked them questions, really listened to their answers, and promised to support them in whatever came next. The children's nanny, Maria, brought them afternoon tea and found the three of them huddled together, talking in hushed but animated voices. She had worked with the family for years and had watched these children grow from bobbies into thoughtful young people. What she witnessed that afternoon confirmed what she had always believed. These were special children, not because of their titles or their place in the line of succession, but because of their hearts. As evening approached, William and Catherine called a family meeting. This time, it was just the five of them in the cozy sitting room that Catherine had designed to feel more like a regular family home than a royal residence. There were comfortable sofas, family photos on the side tables, and toys still scattered in one corner where Louis had been playing the day before. William began by thanking Charlotte and Louis for their honesty at breakfast. He told them how proud he was of their courage and compassion. Catherine added that being part of the royal family came with many challenges, but it also provided unique opportunities to make a real difference in people's lives. The question was how to do that in a way that was authentic and age-appropriate. Charlotte spoke up again, her voice stronger now than it had been at breakfast. She explained that she didn't want to just attend events and smile for cameras. She wanted to actually help people, to do something real. Louis nodded enthusiastically, adding his own ideas in his characteristically enthusiastic way. He suggested they could use their pocket money to help children who didn't have enough food or visit more hospitals to cheer up sick kids. George, feeling inspired by his younger siblings, shared his own thoughts. He talked about environmental issues he had been learning about in school and how worried he was about the future of the planet. He wondered if there was a way they could all work together on causes they cared about, as a team rather than just following the official schedule of royal duties. William and Catherine listened to all three children, and something became very clear. This wasn't just about one conversation at breakfast. This was about a fundamental shift in how the next generation of royals wanted to engage with their roles. These children weren't content to be passive symbols. They wanted to be active participants in creating positive change. The conversation stretched into the dinner hour. The family ordered pizza, something they rarely did, and ate it while continuing to discuss ideas and possibilities. Catherine made notes on her phone, capturing the children's suggestions and concerns. William found himself thinking about his own mother, Princess Diana, and how she had revolutionized royal engagement by bringing genuine emotion and hands-on involvement to her charitable work. Perhaps Charlotte and Louis were channeling that same spirit in their own way. By the time the children went to bed that night, a plan was beginning to form. It wouldn't be announced publicly right away. There were still many details to work out, considerations to balance, and people to consult. But the foundation had been laid for something that could potentially change the public's perception of what young royals could be and do. Charlotte lay in her bed that night, hugging her favorite stuffed animal and feeling lighter than she had in months. She had said what she needed to say, and instead of being dismissed or told she was too young to understand, she had been heard and taken seriously. Louis, in his room down the hall, fell asleep with a smile on his face, dreaming about all the children they could help and all the good they could do. George, the eldest, took longer to fall asleep. He was thinking about responsibility, about the future, about the kind of king he might want to be someday. His brother and sister had reminded him that titles and traditions were important, but compassion and action mattered more. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. In their own bedroom, William and Catherine talked late into the night. They discussed the risks and the rewards, the criticism they might face, and the support they hoped to receive. They thought about how to protect their children's childhood while also honoring their desire to make a difference. It was a delicate balance, but they were determined to find it. What neither the parents nor the children knew yet was that their private family discussion would soon become a very public conversation. The story of what Charlotte and Louis had said, and what the Wales family was planning to do about it, was about to reach far beyond the walls of Windsor Castle. The nation was about to learn that two young royals had spoken words that would inspire, challenge, and ultimately change the way people thought about the role of children in creating a better world. The palace staff went to bed that night knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new decisions, but tonight, they had seen a family come together in support of two brave children who dared to speak their hearts. It was a moment that reminded everyone why they served this particular family, why they believed in what the monarchy could represent at its very best. 3 days after the breakfast conversation, the decision was made to allow Charlotte and Louis to speak publicly about their feelings and ideas. It wasn't a traditional royal announcement or a formal press conference. Instead, William and Catherine decided to do something that had never been done before. They would allow a trusted documentary filmmaker to spend time with the family, capturing genuine moments and conversations that would show the world who these children really were. The filmmaker, Sarah Mitchell, had worked with the royal family before on projects related to mental health and conservation. She was known for her sensitive approach and her ability to make people feel comfortable on camera. When Catherine called her with the proposal, Sarah was initially shocked. Royal children were typically kept far from media exposure, especially unscripted situations. But as Catherine explained what Charlotte and Louis wanted to say and why it mattered, Sarah understood the significance of what was being asked. The filming took place over 2 weeks during the children's school holiday. Sarah and a small crew visited the family at their home in Windsor and accompanied them on several private visits that weren't on the official royal calendar. The goal was to show Charlotte and Louis in real situations, interacting with real people, demonstrating the concerns and compassion that had sparked that pivotal breakfast conversation. One of the first places they visited was a community center in a less affluent area of London. The center provided after-school programs, meals for families in need, and support services for struggling parents. Charlotte and Louis arrived not in official royal cars with flags flying, but in their mother's regular vehicle. They wore casual clothes and carried backpacks filled with books and toys they wanted to donate. The children at the community center didn't know royal visitors were coming. When Charlotte and Louis walked in, there was a moment of stunned silence, followed by excited whispers and giggles. But what happened next surprised everyone, including the film crew. Charlotte immediately sat down on the floor with a group of girls who were doing homework at a low table. She asked them what they were working on and offered to help with math problems, a subject she excelled in at school. Louis gravitated toward the younger children in the play area. He joined a game of building blocks and started chatting with a boy named Jaden who was about his age. Within minutes, the two were laughing together and racing toy cars across the floor. There was no awkwardness, no sense of a royal child condescending to play with common children. It was simply two 6-year-old boys being boys, finding common ground in play and imagination. Sarah captured it all on film, including the moment when Charlotte noticed a girl sitting alone in the corner. The girl, whose name was Amira, looked sad and withdrawn. Charlotte excused herself from the homework table and went to sit beside Amira. The conversation that followed was quiet, and the cameras stayed at a respectful distance, but the body language told the story. Charlotte listened, Amira talked, and gradually the sad girl began to smile. Later, when Sarah asked Charlotte about that moment, the young princess explained what had happened. Amira had told her that her family had recently come to the UK as refugees, and she was having trouble making friends at school because her English wasn't perfect yet. Charlotte had shared her own experience of sometimes feeling shy in new situations and had promised to send Amira some of her favorite books to help with English practice. It was a simple gesture, but it was exactly the kind of genuine connection that Charlotte had talked about wanting to make. The documentary also filmed a visit to a children's hospital, but this time the experience was different from typical royal hospital visits. Instead of a scheduled tour with carefully selected patients and photo opportunities, Charlotte and Louis asked to spend time in the common playroom where children from various wards gathered when they were well enough. They stayed for hours, playing games, reading stories, and just being present with children who were facing serious health challenges. Louis met a boy named Marcus who was recovering from surgery. Marcus was in a wheelchair and feeling discouraged because he couldn't play sports like he used to. Louis, with the straightforward honesty of a 6-year-old, asked Marcus what he could still do. Marcus thought about it and said he could still play video games and tell jokes. Louis immediately challenged him to both, and they spent the next hour competing on a gaming console and trying to make each other laugh. The sound of their laughter echoed through the ward, lifting the spirits of everyone who heard it. Charlotte connected with a teenage girl named Sophie who was going through cancer treatment. Sophie had lost her hair from chemotherapy and felt self-conscious about her appearance. Charlotte, with remarkable emotional intelligence for a 9-year-old, told Sophie that she thought bald was beautiful and asked if she could try on Sophie's collection of colorful headscarves. The two girls ended up having an impromptu fashion show, trying on different scarves and taking silly photos together. Sophie's mother later told the film crew that it was the first time she had seen her daughter genuinely smile in weeks. The documentary captured another significant moment when the family visited a food bank. Charlotte and Louis helped sort donations, pack boxes, and even assisted in distributing food to families who came in. Louis asked questions about why people didn't have enough food, and the food bank director gave honest, age-appropriate answers about poverty, unemployment, and the rising cost of living. Charlotte noticed a woman with 3 children who looked embarrassed to be there. The young princess approached her gently and asked if her children would like to help pack some boxes, framing it as if she needed their assistance rather than pointing out their need for help. The woman's eyes filled with tears at the kindness and dignity of the gesture. Her children eagerly joined in, and what could have been a moment of shame became a moment of connection and shared purpose. Throughout the filming, Sarah made sure to capture not just the interactions with others, but also the conversations between Charlotte and Louis. The siblings talked about what they were seeing and feeling. They asked their parents difficult questions about inequality, illness, and suffering. William and Catherine's responses were honest and thoughtful, never talking down to their children, but explaining complex issues in ways they could understand. One evening, after a particularly emotional day visiting a hospice for terminally ill children, Charlotte asked her father why bad things happened to good people, especially children who hadn't done anything wrong. William sat with his daughter and admitted that he didn't have all the answers. He explained that life could be unfair and painful, but that was exactly why kindness and compassion mattered so much. The people who showed up to help, to care, to make difficult times a little easier, those were the people who made the world better. Louis, listening to the conversation, added his own observation. He said that maybe the reason they were princes and princesses wasn't just about living in castles and wearing crowns. Maybe it was so they could help people and make them feel special and important. Catherine had to excuse herself from the room because the wisdom and purity of her 6-year-old son's words moved her to tears. As the filming came to an end, Sarah had hours of footage that told a powerful story. It wasn't the story of perfect royal children performing dutiful visits. It was the story of 2 young people who genuinely cared about others and wanted to use their unique position to make a difference. It showed their innocence, their sincerity, and their surprising depth of understanding about the world's problems and their potential role in addressing them. The documentary was scheduled to air in 2 weeks, and the palace press office was preparing for the response. They knew it would be unprecedented. They knew it would spark conversations about the role of royal children, about exploitation versus empowerment, about tradition versus modernization. But they also knew that Charlotte and Louis deserved to have their voices heard, to share what was in their hearts, and to inspire others to care as deeply as they did. The night before the documentary aired, the palace released a brief statement explaining what the public was about to see. The statement emphasized that Charlotte and Louis had asked to share their experiences, and that William and Catherine had carefully considered the decision before agreeing. It acknowledged that featuring young royals so prominently was unusual, but argued that the children's genuine desire to connect with others and raise awareness about important issues deserved to be respected. Social media immediately exploded with reactions. People hadn't even seen the documentary yet, but opinions were already sharply divided. Some praised the whale's family for raising compassionate, socially aware children and for allowing them to express themselves. Others criticized the decision as exploitation, arguing that children so young should be protected from public scrutiny and shouldn't be burdened with social issues. Parenting experts, royal commentators, and journalists all weighed in with their perspectives. When the documentary finally aired on a Wednesday evening, over 15 million people tuned in across the UK. In living rooms, pubs, and community centers throughout the nation, people gathered to watch. The program was titled Charlotte and Louis, Young Hearts, Big Dreams, and from the first frame it was clear this wasn't a typical royal production. The opening scene showed Charlotte and Louis in their home, looking slightly nervous but determined. Charlotte spoke directly to the camera, her voice clear despite her obvious anxiety. She explained that she had been thinking a lot about fairness and about how some children had very different lives from hers. She said she felt lucky for what she had, but that luck made her want to help others who weren't as fortunate. She wanted people to know that being a princess didn't mean she didn't care about real problems, or that she lived in a bubble separate from the real world. Louis then chimed in with his characteristic energy, saying that his mummy and daddy had taught him that helping people was the most important job anyone could have. He talked about wanting to make children smile, especially children who were sick or sad. His sincerity was so genuine, his enthusiasm so infectious, that viewers found themselves smiling along with him even as their hearts melted at his innocence. As the documentary progressed, showing the various visits and interactions, the response on social media shifted dramatically. The early criticism began to fade as people saw the reality of what Charlotte and Louis were doing. These weren't staged photo opportunities or rehearsed speeches. The children were genuinely connecting with people, showing real empathy, and asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated they were actually thinking deeply about what they were witnessing. The moment with Charlotte and Amira at the community center resonated particularly strongly with viewers. Thousands of people tweeted about the gentle way Charlotte had approached the lonely refugee girl, about how she had listened without judgment and offered help without condescension. Teachers across the country said they planned to use that clip in their classrooms to teach children about empathy and inclusion. Louis's interaction with Marcus in the hospital went viral. The clip of the two boys laughing together, Louis completely unfazed by Marcus's wheelchair or medical situation, was shared millions of times. Parents of children with disabilities wrote emotional messages thanking Louis for treating Marcus as just another kid, for focusing on what he could do rather than what he couldn't. Marcus's mother gave an interview the next day, saying that her son had been inspired by Louis's attitude and had asked to start trying new activities instead of dwelling on the sports he had to give up. The food bank visit sparked a national conversation about childhood poverty and food insecurity. The way Charlotte had helped that embarrassed mother and her children with such grace and dignity moved people across the political spectrum. Donations to food banks increased by 300% in the week following the documentary's airing. Several celebrities announced new charitable initiatives inspired by what they had seen. But perhaps the most powerful moment in the documentary came near the end. The cameras captured a conversation between all three whales' children and their parents during a quiet evening at home. Charlotte brought up something that had been bothering her. She said that people sometimes told her she was too young to worry about sad things, that she should just enjoy being a child. But she didn't understand how she could enjoy her privileged life while knowing other children were suffering. William's response to his daughter was the moment that made even the harshest critics reconsider their positions. He told Charlotte that her compassion wasn't a burden she needed to carry alone. He explained that caring about others was actually a gift, not a curse, and that she could help people while still being a child. He promised that he and Catherine would guide her, would make sure she had balance in her life, and would never let the weight of the world's problems crush her spirit. He told her she was allowed to play, to laugh, to have fun, and to sometimes put her own needs first. Being caring didn't mean she had to stop being a kid. Catherine added that what made Charlotte and Louis special wasn't their titles or their position in the royal family. What made them special was their hearts, their willingness to see people who others might overlook, and their belief that every person mattered. She said that as parents, she and William's job was to nurture those qualities while also protecting their innocence and joy. The documentary ended with a montage of moments from the visits, showing Charlotte and Louis laughing, playing, and connecting with the people they met. The final shot was of the two children sitting together on a bench in the Windsor Gardens, talking quietly. The audio captured Louis asking Charlotte if she thought they had helped anyone. Charlotte responded that she hoped so, but even if they had only made one person smile or feel less alone, it had been worth it. The credits rolled, and across the nation, people sat in silence, many with tears in their eyes. Social media transformed from a battlefield of opinions into a wave of emotion and inspiration. The hashtag #CharlattanLouis trended worldwide. People shared their own stories of kindness, pledged to volunteer or donate, and expressed overwhelming support for the young royals and their family. The criticism didn't disappear entirely. Some still argued that children shouldn't be exposed to such heavy topics or public attention. Child psychologists debated the long-term effects on national television. But they were drowned out by the chorus of voices praising not just Charlotte and Louis, but the way William and Catherine were raising them. People saw a family that was using their privilege to do good, that was teaching their children values over vanity, and that was allowing those children to be authentic rather than merely ornamental. Schools across the UK reported that children were coming in the next day, asking their teachers how they could help others like Charlotte and Louis did. Youth volunteer organizations saw a surge in applications. Parents started having deeper conversations with their own children about empathy, privilege, and responsibility. The documentary had sparked something larger than anyone had anticipated. In Windsor, the Wales family watched the public response with a mixture of relief and amazement. They had hoped people would understand what Charlotte and Louis were trying to do, but they hadn't expected such an overwhelming positive reaction. Charlotte asked if this meant they could keep visiting places and helping people. William smiled and assured her that yes, they would find ways to continue this work, but always at a pace that felt right for her and Louis, always with their well-being as the top priority. Louis, already thinking ahead, announced that he wanted to visit every hospital in the country to play with every sick child. Catherine gently explained that while they couldn't visit everywhere, they could definitely visit more places and make more connections. She reminded him that sometimes the best way to help was to inspire others to help too, creating a ripple effect where one act of kindness led to many more. That night, as Charlotte and Louis went to bed, they had no idea that their simple desire to speak from their hearts had touched millions of people. They didn't understand the full scope of what they had started or how their words and actions would continue to resonate. They were just children who cared about others and had been brave enough to say something when they could have stayed silent. And that, more than anything else, was what made their story so powerful and so shocking to a nation that had never quite seen young royals like this before. 6 months after the documentary aired, the impact of Charlotte and Louis's words continued to reshape conversations about childhood, privilege, and purpose. The Wales family had settled into a new rhythm, one that balanced the children's education and normal development with carefully selected opportunities to engage with causes they cared about. The palace had established strict guidelines to protect the children while honoring their wishes to make a difference. Charlotte had started a pen pal program, writing letters to children in hospitals and care facilities across the UK. With her mother's help, she would spend an hour each week crafting thoughtful messages to children who were lonely or struggling. The program expanded when other children began asking how they could become pen pals too. Soon, a national youth letter writing initiative had formed, connecting thousands of children who wanted to spread kindness through written words. Louis had become an unofficial ambassador for pediatric mental health. After learning about children who felt anxious or scared, especially in medical settings, he had recorded a series of short videos with the help of child psychologists. In these videos, he talked about his own fears and how he dealt with them. He demonstrated breathing exercises that helped him when he felt worried. His genuine, unpolished delivery made the videos incredibly effective. Hospitals started playing them in waiting rooms and treatment areas, and parents reported that their children felt calmer and braver after watching Prince Louis explain that being scared was okay, and that everyone, even princes, felt afraid sometimes. George, inspired by his younger siblings, had launched his own initiative focused on environmental conservation. He had convinced his school to start a recycling and composting program, and his enthusiasm for protecting nature had led to a nationwide youth environmental network. The three children had discovered that together they could accomplish more than any of them could alone. They supported each other's projects, appeared together at events when appropriate, and formed a united front of young people determined to make their world better. The international response had been equally remarkable. Royal families from other countries reached out, inspired by what the Wales children were doing. Young royals from Spain, Belgium, and Sweden started their own age-appropriate charitable projects. Charlotte and Louis had inadvertently started a global movement of royal children who wanted to be known for their contributions rather than just their titles. But the most profound changes were happening in unexpected places. Schools across the UK had integrated lessons about empathy and social responsibility into their curricula, directly inspired by Charlotte and Louis. Teachers created kindness challenges, where students performed acts of service in their communities and reflected on the experience. Youth volunteer rates had increased by 60%. Bullying incidents in schools had decreased, as children internalized the message that everyone deserved respect and compassion. The children Charlotte and Louis had met during filming had become part of their extended story. Amira, the refugee girl, had gained confidence in her English skills and had become a peer mentor at her school, helping other immigrant children adjust to their new country. Marcus, the boy in the wheelchair, had discovered a talent for wheelchair basketball and had joined a competitive team. Sophie, the teenager with cancer, had gone into remission and had started a support group for young people dealing with serious illnesses. Each of these children credited their encounter with Charlotte and Louis as a turning point in their lives. Emma, the little girl from the hospital that Charlotte had mentioned in that first breakfast conversation, had also recovered. When Charlotte learned this news, she asked if she could meet Emma again. The meeting was private, not filmed or publicized, and when it happened, both girls simply enjoyed being together without any cameras or expectations. They played with dolls, talked about their favorite books, and made each other friendship bracelets. It was exactly what Charlotte had wanted all along: genuine connection, not performance. William and Catherine watched their children grow and evolve, amazed by the maturity they demonstrated while still maintaining their childhood wonder and joy. The parents had learned important lessons too. They had discovered that protecting their children didn't mean shielding them from reality, and that giving them age-appropriate ways to engage with the world's problems actually empowered rather than burdened them. The documentary team followed up with a special 1-hour program showing what had happened in the 6 months since the original film aired. This time, the focus was on the ripple effects. The program featured interviews with people whose lives had been touched by Charlotte and Louis' message, children who had started their own kindness projects, and families who had begun having deeper conversations about privilege and responsibility. One particularly moving segment featured a single mother who had been struggling to provide for her 3 children. She had been at the food bank on the day of the royal visit, though she hadn't directly interacted with the family. Watching the documentary later, she had been struck by Charlotte's genuine care and Louis's innocent joy in helping. It had given her hope during a dark time and motivated her to keep fighting for her family. 6 months later, she had found stable employment and was volunteering at the same food bank that had helped her. She told the camera that if a 9-year-old princess could care enough to show up and help, she could certainly do the same. The update program also showed Charlotte and Louis watching some of the original documentary with their parents. They were embarrassed by seeing themselves on screen and giggled at some of their own comments. But when they saw the segments showing the people they had met and helped, they grew quiet and thoughtful. Charlotte asked if those people were really doing better now. When William confirmed that many of them were, and explained how their visit had inspired positive changes, Charlotte smiled with genuine satisfaction. Louis wanted to know if they could do more visits. He had a list of places he wanted to go and people he wanted to meet. Catherine explained that they would continue to do this work, but always in a way that let him be a child first and a prince second. She reminded him that he didn't have to save the world all by himself. He just had to do what he could, when he could, with a kind heart. The program ended with a round-table discussion featuring William, Catherine, and several experts in child development, social psychology, and philanthropy. They discussed how to raise children who were both privileged and empathetic, how to give young people purpose without overwhelming them, and how the example set by Charlotte and Louis could inform parenting and education more broadly. One expert made a point that resonated with viewers. She said that what Charlotte and Louis had done wasn't extraordinary because of their royal status. It was extraordinary because they had spoken an uncomfortable truth that many adults avoided. That awareness of suffering demanded response, and that privilege carried responsibility. The fact that such young children understood this and acted on it challenged adults to examine their own lives and choices. As the special program concluded, the camera returned one final time to Charlotte and Louis. They were back in their garden at Windsor, playing with their dog and laughing as children should. The message was clear. They were still kids, still entitled to carefree moments and simple joys. But they were also something more. They were children who had found their voices, who had spoken words that resonated across a nation and beyond, and who had proven that age was no barrier to compassion and action. The narrator's final words summarized the remarkable journey. 6 months ago, 2 young royals shocked the UK by saying something no one expected. They spoke of care, of responsibility, of wanting to help rather than simply exist in privilege. What they started that morning at breakfast has grown into something far larger than anyone could have predicted. They reminded us that children see the world with clarity that adults often lose, that compassion isn't learned from books but from listening to one's heart, and that real change begins not with grand gestures but with simple acts of kindness and genuine human connection. The screen faded to black, leaving millions of viewers reflecting on their own lives and wondering how they might answer the challenge that 2 young children had inadvertently issued to the world. In living rooms across the UK and beyond, parents hugged their children a little tighter, families started conversations about helping others, and people recommitted to being the kind of person that Charlotte and Louis already were. Someone who saw need and responded, who recognized privilege and shared it, who understood that titles and status meant nothing compared to the difference you made in another person's life. And in Windsor, Charlotte and Louis went to bed that night unaware of the continued impact of their words. They were simply 2 children who had been honest about what they felt and brave enough to act on those feelings. They had said something no one expected, and in doing so, they had reminded an entire nation of what truly mattered. It wasn't wealth or position or power. It was kindness, compassion, and the courage to care. Those were the things that would define their generation of royals, and those were the qualities that would, hopefully, define the world they were growing up to inherit and improve.